guys, this is Lauren Hollows from NOI Education Services, and today I want to talk to you about, do I need a mapping document? So this is something that we really commonly get asked, and I have discussions with providers all the time who are constantly saying, I don't need a mapping guide. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? You are correct. Technically, as per the standards, you don't need a mapping guide. But here's the problem is people who don't have mapping guides very often don't have processes to actually make sure that what a mapping guide is supposed to do is actually being done. So there's a fantastic resource which is available on the ASQA website. There was a video that was recorded by Andrew Shea and a couple of ASQA auditors about 2 years ago now, but it's still really relevant. And so what I wanted to do today was to kind of highlight that and just read through some of the parts of it and talk about why mapping guides are probably, for the vast majority of RTOs, one of the easiest ways to go about ensuring validity in your assessment tools, and talk about some of the other ways that people do utilize systems covering this. So this is kind of a back and forth between Andrew Shea, who is leading the conversation. And if you're not following him on LinkedIn, definitely worthwhile. He is very, very active within our industry. And a few of the ASQA auditors, in this case, it was two individuals called Judith and Ian. So Judith stated, ASQA developed a document called A Guide to Developing Assessment Tools, which is available on our website that covers the process for looking and considering the initial requirements in a training package through to actually developing a full suite of assessment tools for implementation. Andrew then follows up, sure, but regarding mapping itself, what would you expect to see, or what do you see from RTOs that are able to clearly at audit say, here's how I'm comfortable we're meeting all the requirements? Judith then said, the process of mapping is really useful in that it allows the RTO to align its assessment tools or tasks to the requirements of the training package and to be able to demonstrate that. However, there is no requirement to produce a mapping document per se. And many RTOs demonstrate in other ways how their assessment tasks actually meet the requirements of the training package. For example, they may notate onto the assessment tool itself which aspects of the unit of competency the actual assessment task is addressing. So it's not a separate mapping document that they have that may be recorded, that they may have recorded there, which requirements that particular task addresses. Ian then said, and some of the purchase resources you can buy will include a mapping guide, but it's the responsibility of the RTO to contextualize any documentation they've purchased to ensure that it meets the requirements for their particular delivery mode. NETA. So from a mapping, if they were to use a mapping tool and those third-party resources, they should revisit the mapping tool once they've contextualized the resources. And that's kind of then when they go on to a next section. So I kind of want to just go through that 2 points. So there was 2 ways that were discussed there as to kind of how an RTO could demonstrate that their system is valid. And ultimately what the mapping guide is it is a tool for ensuring that your assessment tools are valid and that they've covered all the requirements. And so when I say they've covered all the requirements, what I mean by that, and what it very actually explicitly states within the standards, is it says validity requires that assessment is against the units of competency and the associated assessment requirements, covering the broad range of skills and knowledge that are essential to competent performance. Assessment of the knowledge and skills is integrated with their practical application. Assessment is to be based on evidence that demonstrates that a learner could demonstrate these skills in other situations, as in it's not just a one-off. Judgment of competence is based on evidence of the learner that is aligned to the unit of competency and associated assessment requirements. So one of the things that I often get asked is what actually needs to go into a mapping guide. The entire unit goes into the mapping guide. So we literally have everything. We have the elements, we have the performance criteria, we have the performance evidence, we have the knowledge evidence, we have the foundation skills where they're present. In the older units, we would include, it had like that kind of additional extra section. We include, the assessment conditions. So we put everything into our mapping guide. And what we have basically the entire mapping guide with all of the different requirements. And then down the side, we put our mapping. And so in the case of Anna Wire's tools, we generally have 3 kind of assessments. We have a knowledge assessment, which is built around the knowledge criteria. And I will show that to you guys in another video. And then we have the projects and practicals. So again, this kind of depends on the AQF level and the training package and things like that. But we'll have projects and practicals. And sometimes those will be separated and other times those will be together, just depending on what is most appropriate for the unit of competency. And anytime there is a project and a practical, there is an observation checklist of what needs to be observed in that project or what needs to be observed in that practical, and the benchmarks for that for the assessor to know when it's been demonstrated sufficiently. So that's kind of what goes into ours. And then when it comes down to the assessment conditions, we normally comment. So for example, it will say, one of the common ones is, if assessment is required in the workplace or if assessment is required in the, if it can be done in simulation. And so we talk about how the assessment has been contextualized and designed for one of those two, because our assessment tools are either designed for one or the other generally. And we pre-contextualize all of our tools specifically for the delivery mode and the cohort, which is a little bit different than some of the other pre-purchase resources that you might get off the, of different companies. And then the other thing that we do is for things like, you might say, it must be assessed by, qualified assessors under the standards. We'll put things like, refer to the RTOs, trainer and assessor policy, or refer to the TAS, or if it has equipment, we put a note there saying something like, please refer to the equipment checklist, and we'll either provide an equipment checklist or we'll highlight for the RTO that they need to include their specific equipment checklist, and that kind of lets the RTO they need to have an equipment checklist. So that's how we handle it. The reason why we do it that way is because, as I said, as that conversation alluded to, there was kind of 2 ways that it gets done. Either it's done within the assessment tool and instruments themselves, or it's done in kind of a separate document. So I've seen it 3 ways. I've seen it individual standalone document for each unit of competency. I've seen lots of massive clustering ones where they put it into a spreadsheet, and it's done like across the whole qualification. Personally, my experience, I substantially dislike them. My entire team dislikes it. And from what I've seen, most ASCO auditors find it very frustrating, because quite often it's a lot harder to actually read and find the information when you're coming at it from an external audit perspective. So I really don't like having a single document with all of your mapping guides in it for a qualification. It also potentially means that if you're running that unit across multiple quals, it's very hard to make sure that it stays updated correctly and things like that. So my preference is always a single mapping guide for a single unit. I have found that it is by far the easiest way to read it. It is the most successful at audit. Mapping into the mapping guide, mapping into the assessment tool, the problem with that is that it is really hard to know, unless you have another separate document. It's really hard to know that you've actually covered everything. Now, there are some people who do this really well. Like, they kind of have like a second system whereby they'll have a printout from TGA, and they'll sit there and they'll color code it, and they'll go, this goes here and this goes here and stuff like that. And that all works very well. However, I will not deny that if you are being audited and if you have to submit your tools to external validation, if you have to submit your tools to a regulator, I think you are very silly. And I think you are potentially putting more risk doing it the other way around. And again, the reason is because I validate dual tools all the time. And I will often find that when you are mapping in the document, you'll miss something. And if you are mapping within the document and you have a standalone assessment tool, I've never once done an audit with that method where I haven't found things missing, like where there are not, where the assessment instrument itself says I cover A, B, and C. And then when I go to the mapping document, it'll say A, B, and D, right? So the more that you, like, if you're having it in there multiple times, you are running the risk of something being wrong. So generally that's how I manage it. And I do believe it is the best way, because the thing that everyone needs to remember is that we have multiple masters in this industry. Our assessment tools need to meet the student requirements. So they need to be engaging and contextualized for the cohort. They need to be understandable and clear and concise for the trainer to understand what they need to do so that they can facilitate that with their students. And it needs to be clear to a validation team, compliance team, and the regulator when they are auditing it, as to where they should be seeing the evidence. So that part of where I should see the evidence, that is your mapping guide. And that is why quite often over mapping, under mapping, mapping in multiple places, just mapping within the document, like within the assessment instruments themselves, it does, in my experience, it does not work. I have absolutely no doubts, and there will be people out there who will say that's the system that we use, it's bulletproof, all of our trainers understand it, it's easy to validate. I get that. There will be people. I believe that that is the exception and not the rule. And I believe that the rule for the majority of RTOs is you should have a separate standalone mapping guide which covers everything: the performance criteria, the performance evidence, the required evidence, the assessment requirements, the foundation skills, as a standalone document. And you should go through and you should be able to clearly see where everything maps. And the detail within which you need to go to in the mapping document will be the subject of our next video. So if you guys did like this, please like, subscribe, do all of those good things. Keep following us. If you do find the videos helpful, please, hit the like button, put a comment in there. If you have any questions, feel free to comment or send an email through to lauren@anawire.org, and I'm more than happy. I get a lot of requests through LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to take the time to respond to those. Otherwise, I hope you guys found this helpful. Have a wonderful day. My name is Lauren Hollows for Anawire Education Services.